just kind of talking about grief and how we process grief. And Charlene is my business coach and writing coach, but has just really become my friend over the last year. And she's doing this 45 days of grief with me. Had traveled all the way from North Carolina to do the Sweat Lodge last night around grief. And you've experienced some pretty significant loss yourself.
Yes.
Tell us what you did, because we're trying to do this whole series on how do you actually go through the process. Everyone talks about what the process should look like. All of the theories say, yes, you have to process this, but they don't really say how. How did you process some of your grief? Maybe in 3 stages, like initially.
So when my husband passed away, when my children were very small, they were 2 and 4. So sort of at the time, I felt like I was just really kind of running around after them, and I didn't have time to really fall apart, I guess, or, take care of myself as much. So during those times, I sort of tried to distract myself by telling myself that my husband was just at work. Or I remember vividly dropping the kids off at school, and just on the drive, it was a really long drive, I would cry on the way there and cry on the way back. And that's sort of what I did. I didn't dedicate a lot of time to grieve, I would say, early on. Mm-hmm. And then over time, I started to process things. And I think I had the most dedicated time processing it as I wrote a book about it. So I was sort of recalling all the events and thinking about what it was. And that was years and years later. And I would say that grief never really goes away, but it's a part of your life all the time. And my children and I talk about my husband, and they can't remember him as much as I would love for them to remember him. But they were very young, and I think even though they didn't kind of process that, it's a part of their identity now.
Yeah. And we talked about that because I lost my father from a brain aneurysm when I was 10 months old, and I spent my whole life thinking it didn't impact me because I didn't know him. But the series of events that happened after, the fact that I didn't have a father, all those things impacted me through that time. And I know as a mom, you were just like thinking, how do I not traumatize my kids? That's what we do as moms, like all the time.
And I think that they probably feel traumatized by me a lot of the time. But unfortunately, I always try to tell them and make the most of the situation and just say, you're having this one-of-a-kind childhood that nobody else is getting. But I do feel that pressure of being both mom and dad at times, and I feel like I was a better mom before he passed away, but now I'm a pretty good dad. That's how I look at it.
So we've been working together for a while, and you understand the Mentally Strong method and how all of these different categories need to be dealt with differently. Do you think that would have been helpful had you known that, in the earlier stages of grief?
I definitely think so, for sure, and just kind of taking the time to really process it. And so many people, as you said, think there should be a set timeline for grief and that you should get it all done up front. And really, for me, that wasn't the case at all, to the point where people thought my behavior was maybe not the same as someone who had just lost someone, because I was doing a lot in my power just to kind of put it on the back burner and try to present a strong front. It sort of felt like if I was grieving in front of the children, I might make them feel worse. And really, I wanted to just make them feel okay, and that they were safe, and that they were loved, and that their life was going to be okay. And so I think if I had something where I could schedule time to grieve, get on with my day-to-day life, it really would have been helpful for me.
But you knew that. There came a time where you were like, I have to actually process this, and you chose to write a book. And that's what I always talk about, like, we've got to find the time to grieve, even if it's years later. Tell us about that process of writing the book.
So I was writing the book, and I was trying to recall a lot of the events that happened. My husband passed away really suddenly. He left for work one day and didn't come home, and there was a series of events leading up to that, which I really think of as a night of torture, because his helicopter went missing, and I knew it was missing, but I didn't know the outcome, and it transpired over this series of 8 hours, maybe 10 hours. It was just all night, and it was really just a horrific experience, and you know, at the time I thought it was bad, but I think until I actually wrote the book, I realized just how intense and how stressful the whole entire situation was, both when it happened and afterwards, because it became a story on the news, and people were stopping by my house, and it just turned into this big thing. And it's not the same as 9/11, but it's sort of that similar experience where, you know, everywhere I would go, people would talk to me about it, and that's just not the normal kind of day-to-day experience when someone passes away.
Yeah, and even as you were telling the story, you know, I could feel like a wave of, you know, energy or fear for you, and I'm just hearing about that. So living it. How long did it take you to actually go through and write that book?
Oh, wow. So it was a good 6, 7, no, maybe even more, maybe 8 years later. And it took me about a year and a half to write the book, and I kept going back and forth. And I chose to write about how we met through how he passed away. And so it was a kind of a slice of life kind of thing, and it really just made me think about that period of time and appreciate it more, and really kind of re-experience some of the grief that I went through.
Yeah. And how long has it been now?
It's been 13 years.
13 years. And when you flew all the way here, I know to support me, but you participated in the Grief Lodge. What did that experience do for you in that grief process? Because, you know, time, might lessen the intensity, but it's still there.
Yeah, so it was an interesting experience for me, because I kind of believe in a lot of things like the Sweat Lodge. So I was kind of taking the time not only to think about becoming stronger myself, but also trying to connect and really focus on people that I loved who'd passed away, which was probably 5 or 6 people. So I tried to sort of send messages to them, and really I had this sensation of, my husband was trying to joke back with me in my mind, and my father-in-law, and and that's how they were all the time. I said, you would be doing something like this, and sort of laughed. And I just took it as an opportunity to try to send a positive message to them, and just be open to receive something back. So I agree that with time, the intensity is not there as much. It's not like Patrick just passed away, and a lot of the things around his death, the issues are surrounding it. Why did it happen? A lot of that I've sort of processed and dealt with on my own. When your spouse passes away suddenly, it's like you're married one day and you're single the next. And that for me was really, really challenging, because it's not like when you get a divorce, at least there's a timeline, there's some kind of discussion. But for me, it was like married one day, single the next. So I had to not only process his passing, but also just closing out the marriage by myself, which was challenging.
And the change of identity.
Yes.
I mean, you were a family to being a single mom.
And
which has a different identity.
It really does, and that's something I really fought against. There's so much of a negative stereotype out there about single moms, and I kind of really fought it at first. I thought, and this is something I've given a lot of thought to, because I've definitely changed, but in the beginning, I just thought, I don't want to be a single mom, that's bad. I sort of kept clinging to my old identity, and it wasn't until I really accepted, okay, now you are a single mom, it's not the end of the world, you can do this, and started to really embrace it, that I started to thrive. So when you fight against your reality, your situation, that's when you have even more of a challenge. And when you accept it, you kind of just get into the groove and go with it. And a lot of times I now talk purposely about being a single mom, because I want other single moms out there to be able to identify and to say, okay, she's okay. I'll be okay too.
Yeah, yeah. And I love the way you said when you're kind of fighting against your reality. And I've done the same thing. Like, this is not what I want. This is not. It just makes it worse. And one of the grief books that I reviewed in the YouTube channel was about ACT type therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, and it talked about pain is inevitable. We will all experience pain. Struggle is a choice. And when we fight it, and I'm even getting choked up saying it because I fight it all the time because I'm a fighter. Like, that's what I do. I want to fix things. But that struggle is a choice. Like, we can grieve. We can organize these thoughts. We can decide what we're doing with these different areas of our life. But in the same breath, give yourself grace, because this arbitrary 1 year is a lie.
Yes.
It is a lie.
A lie.
So, thank you.
Thank you.